Welcome again to the Ivory Tower Collections. Today's video is going to be something I've not done before, so it could be an interesting one. But basically, you will see here two Atari Lynx units. And these are actually Model 2s. And like a lot of portable handhelds back in the day, especially notorious of the Game Gear type units, the capacitors go bad in these things and require that they be replaced. One good indication of this is poor audio quality. So as an example, I am going to turn both of these units on one at a time and let you listen to what it should first sound like, more or less, because both of these actually have their original capacitors still, but this one here, which is the one I use as my primary Lynx when I play on the go, still sounds good. And the other one, you'll be able to tell pretty quickly. So let me kick this on, and hopefully the audio will be picked up on this. I'm not using my new mic yet on this because and I also tried to capture audio, by the way, through the headphone ports. However, the headphone jack has a separate amplifier circuit from the external speaker. So as a result, to be honest, they both sounded the same through the headphone jack. And that's really not a good indication. It would be too difficult to tell the difference. So I'll just turn this one on and you'll hear how it should more or less sound. Now I have these both at full volume, by the way, so there might be some distortion anyway, but you'll still be able to tell the difference, I imagine. So let me turn this one on first. Oh, silly me. You have to put a game in them. Yeah, if you didn't know that, Lynx will not turn on without a game inserted. And I'm going to use the game Zarler Mercenary, just as a good example. It's got a lot of audio in it. So we'll turn this one on, and I'll try to zoom in on it. There we go. And hopefully the picture probably won't be that great on this for the capture, but we'll do what we can. So we'll turn it on. Okay, so there's that one, and so you could hear that, and actually, again, it's at full volume, and the audio is pretty clear. So let me switch over now to this other Lynx, which is the one we're going to work on today. And by the way, both of these still have original LCDs in them too, so yeah, the picture is not the best, but they still light up okay. Okay, get this one put in. And get it situated here, and we'll turn this one on now. Yeah, pretty crummy, huh? So that's what today's project's going to be. We're going to see if we can't help clear up that audio a little bit by installing capacitor replacement kit for the Lynx Model 2. the two Lynxes, the Model 1 and the Model 2, while they work essentially the same, they do have different layouts and different PCBs and different capacitor values, of course, and different types and amounts. So, and as you can see, I did purchase this capacitor kit from Console 5. It's a great place for getting capacitor kits. In fact, I think the Lynx Model 2 capacitor kit is like right around $8 plus shipping. So that's not too bad. I mean, as you can see, there's quite a few capacitors on here. I haven't counted out exactly how many. I'm going to guess probably around 20 or so. In addition, I also have... This, I need to zoom back out for this, but I have a lovely capacitor map that I took the graphics from off of Console 5 and consolidated them onto a single sheet of paper. So I have the capacitor values along with the map layout on the PCB on where the capacitors go. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to get this thing disassembled and we will go from there. Okay, so here we have the Lynx Model 2 and I'm getting ready to take it apart. Now, it's been a number of years since I've actually disassembled one of these. So this could be interesting. Additionally, I couldn't remember exactly what tools I was going to need to take this thing apart, so I've just kind of brought my usual stuff. My number 2 Phillips, I always have that around. This time I also brought a number 1 Phillips, just in case I have any smaller Phillips head screws in there, and I'm pretty sure it is Phillips heads. It was pretty common back then in the day, so we'll go with that. Of course, I still have my flush cutters and my small electrical needle nose pliers. Other things I've brought additionally, of course, is I have my lovely Heiko soldering iron, my 937 tip, and my 936, or I'm sorry, 907 iron wand and the 936 station. And although I may not need it, I've got it just in case, but here is my Heiko 300 desoldering iron as well. Again, I may not need it, but always better to have it than not have it when you need it. So here we go. We're going to get started. Now, I know that one thing is there is a screw underneath the battery cover. So you got to take the battery cover off. And you've got a Phillips head hiding right down in here. And it is a number 2, but I don't know if I'll be able to get to it. I might be able to get to it. Got to really come at it at an angle, but it is there. And like everything else, you want to keep your stuff in place. So let me get my lovely little Santa Claus plate over here. Put my screws in. And of course there's other screws. Where are they? They're actually hiding underneath the rubber grips. So these have to come off as well. So let me get these off. And these can be a mite tricky. I basically just start at one end and pull up on it carefully. Like that. And of course you're going to want to probably have a sheet of wax paper or something nearby that you could attach them back onto to keep debris and dust from getting onto them, because you're going to stick them back on here again. Okay, let me get this other one off. And notice I'm just kind of working my way slowly. Okay, there we go. That'll work. And I'll keep those off to the side there, out of the way. And we have 2 more screws on either side that will need to be removed. And it looks like a number 2 will work. Okay, they are a different color from the other screws, so I want to make sure I keep them off to the side. They're silver instead of black like the one that was in the battery compartment. Okay, get everything else kind of out of the way here for a second. Hopefully that's enough screws removed. Let's see if the cover will come off. There we go. Just got to kind of work with it slowly. So there we go. And that leaves you with the battery compartment area and the main PCB of the Lynx Model 2. There's the cartridge connector here. And of course all the capacitors are located on the opposite side of the board. So that'll be the next step, is to weasel this stuff out. And I'll have to take a look at this here for a second so I can see what's what and what's in the way. Again, it's been a little while since I removed one of these. Okay, I slowly took out the battery compartment tray. Okay, so the ribbon cables are what are fighting me here. And it looks like the speaker wire doesn't give me much room to work with either. So I have to be very careful taking all this off. You don't want to rip the ribbon cables, that would be bad, of course. So let me see if I can figure out a way to, I think I'm just going to have to get these cables and wires off. So that you can see what I'm going to do, I'm going to have to remove the speaker wire here. And this is where using my little needle nose kind of come in handy, because they can reach into places where I cannot. I'm just going to wiggle that back and forth, separate that, pull that off to the side, and then we need to get these two. I'm also going to go ahead and pull off the LCD cable here. It's located right here, or at least I'm going to try to. That one's also a little, oh, I've got it started, good. There we go, that's off of there. Alright, and then that just leaves me with these two ribbon cables down here, which again, I don't have much room to work with. They're located right here, so I'm going to have to be very careful in taking those out. And they do have locks or little latches that kind of hold them down in place, so I'm just going to slide that down to carefully pop that one out, and we'll do the same with this other one. It's going to be a little trickier. Let's see here. Now what I'm doing is I'm just kind of using the side of my finger here to grab onto it and push it down physically like that. Okay, and then slowly slide that one out, and there we go. We've got the main PCB and board components out. And there is the fluorescent backlight and LCD assembly. So I'm going to set that off to the side. Already not looking forward to trying to put that back together. Yeah. Okay, well, it is what it is. Let me set it off to the side. Alright, so that means the bulk of the work remains right here with all these little guys, all these little capacitors. And again, this is why I have my capacitor maps. So if I pull this out, take a look at it, and orientate the same way, it looks like almost all of these are through hole. That is awesome, actually. Very awesome. And this one's not going to be that fun to change out. I'm talking about this little guy right here that's underneath this RF shielding plate for the main processor and video processor boards. But otherwise, it looks like these are all through hole. So it's just a matter of, yeah, guess it's a good thing I did bring the desoldering iron along for this little trip. So there we go. I'm just making sure everything matches up. Looks like it does so far. There's not a lot of room on a lot of these, so they may have to, wow, yeah, they all have to be really low profile for the most part. Okay, well, I'm going to get started on desoldering these out then. So here we go. So I've now got all the capacitors removed off the board, and a couple of things to show you. The good news is that if you look carefully on the board, you will see that most of the capacitor locations will have a little plus sign next to one of the post holes or next to one of the vias, indicating which side's the positive and the negative, so you know which way the polarity needs to go when you replace the capacitors. However, one little tricky thing. The capacitor located right inside of that hole underneath this shielding plate is conveniently covered by this copper ground shield plate, or this copper ground plane that they've put and applied on here, and it is soldered down. So what I had to do was I had to carefully desolder two of the connection points here and over here, and then kind of lift back on it like this in order to get to the part where the capacitor was soldered in down in here. So that was fun. Yeah, so just something to be aware of. It should be kind of interesting putting this back on. I may have to get some electrical tape to kind of hold it back down until I get the corners soldered back in place. But I only had to just do these two corners. It might have been easier if I'd gone ahead and undone this one as well. Then the whole thing might have been able to be lifted back up this way, but I was able to get in there with just this, so that should be good. So yeah, now I'm ready to replace the capacitors back onto the board. And again, this is where my lovely capacitor map will come in quite handy. And one of the things I do, if you take a look at how I've drawn this up, I have the actual capacitor locations and their values listed along the side here. I will frequently actually take the capacitors themselves, the replacements, like this one, and I'll punch them into the paper next to their locations. That way I don't have to really search for them. If I've gone ahead and done it once before, I just go through them, punch them in place, and then I just start going down the list when I replace them. It makes it easy to remember where I've left off, and I make sure that I already have the correct value where it needs to go. And of course, you can also just, take a pen or something and just mark them off as well, but that's what I sometimes do. Real quick, I wanted to show you, I talked about this a second ago, but here's that same capacitor map, and I've laid out some of the capacitors by simply poking them through the paper with the right values. So essentially I can just go through and I already know I have the right value in place and verified, and it makes it easy so I don't have to search around for them again. So that's one thing. The other thing is a few things I noticed when getting some of these capacitors already soldered on. And this would probably be obvious to some, maybe not, but just letting you know. So some of the replacement capacitors might be a little bit bigger than the originals, so you have to make sure you're really pushing them down as flush down to the board as you can when you solder them on, so they don't stick up too high. Or they might be a little bigger than the original that was there, so you just kind of have to, again, get it on there as close as you can. Something else I noticed, at least with this particular capacitor kit, was that several of the capacitors are of the same type and voltage rating, and however, that doesn't mean they're the same size capacitor physically. So one such example of this is that this capacitor over here, which you can see is a little bit bigger than these two next to it, is actually the same value and voltage rating. In this case, it is a 10 microfarad 50 volt, and calls for 10 35s, and a few are only 10 and 6.3s, but still the kit provided with 10 and 50s. Again, when it comes to capacitors, the voltage is somewhat important, but not as critical as the capacitance is. So you have to make sure that the capacity value is identical and that the voltage is as close, if not a good match. So we'll see. I'm curious to know if a 50 volt in place of a 6.3 will do the job, but that's what came in the kit. But the reason why I mentioned that about the physical sizes is because this capacitor being a little larger than these two meant that it wouldn't physically fit in this spot here between the RF shield. Again, this is also the same value and type. And so yeah, I had to go through some of the others and make sure I found one that would physically fit into the opening. So just something else to be aware of. Additionally, I told you this before about how I had to peel this back to undo one of the capacitor's legs from behind to desolder it. Well, what I didn't tell you was there was a piece of tape that was over those 2 points originally underneath the board. So make sure you hold on to that tape somewhere, or use a replacement piece of electrical tape to put back over the soldered leads when you replace it before soldering this copper ground back down. So that's what I'm going to be doing now, is just kind of soldering this back down in place and get the rest of the capacitors put in. Again, I put some of them in already, but yeah, time to get the rest of them knocked out. So here we go. Okay, so I have all of the rest of the capacitors back on and in place, and I guess my only real concern at this point is that, again, some of the new capacitors are taller than the original ones were, but then in some cases they're about the same height, and so I'm hoping that if I am guessing properly on this, that as long as there's enough clearance across the board of the highest components and capacitors, that we should be good to go. My real concern is over here by the volume knob adjustment. These are really tall compared to the originals, and you can see there's two smaller ones right next to it, but they are different values, so they're not going to all be the same kind. So I guess what I'll do is I'll try to get it put back into the case and give it a test fire, make sure it works, and if it doesn't, well, that's how we learn, isn't it? So yeah, let me try to squeeze this back into the shell and we'll go from there. Okay, we now have enough of the links put back together to be able to test this, and hopefully it still comes up and works properly, and maybe even the sound will be cleaned up. That's what we're going for. The only things left to screw in is really just the leftover smaller screw that goes down in here into the battery compartment area and the cover itself, but otherwise it's in place. seems to be good to go. I did have some trouble with the capacitors that go around the speaker. And on the capacitor sheet here, it's going to be these two right here. They were sitting a little bit tall, so whenever you're doing this for yourself, you might want to give yourself a little bit more on the legs to make them stand up a little taller off the PCB so that you can fold them over to the sides opposite or however flat. In fact, since the posts go horizontally, you would want to give them a little more legs so you can fold them over sideways. Aside from those, the rest of them seem to fit in just fine standing straight up, which is good. So those are really the only two that gave me any concern. So yeah, I'm going to get some power hooked back up to this thing, and we'll see what happens. Let's give this thing a test. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here, and again, we're going to use Zarler Mercenary, so I'm just going to pop it in. Now, I initially have I have the volume turned off and everything just kind of at lowest values, so that when I turn this on, I'll have to adjust them, obviously. But let's first make sure that it will power on and not smoke and blow up in my hands. Okay, so far so good. Oh. It says insert game. That's not a good sign. Turn that off real quick. Make sure I have this seated in properly. There we go. Let me adjust the contrast down a little bit and maybe we can see the game. I'm going to turn up some sound. Well, gotta tell you, in my opinion, I don't think it sounds all that much different than it did before, so maybe there's something else wrong with this particular Lynx. But never hurts to do the capacitors anyway. They are rather old. So let's see here. Yeah, it still has that very distorted sound in my opinion. Hi there, just a real quick addendum on something here. So remember I told you about the two capacitors on the capacitor map that stood kind of tall and could interfere with the speaker? Well, that's exactly what was happening with these two capacitors. So what I did was I hit them up with a little bit of solder and with my iron, and I folded them down a little bit. I had just enough leg left on them to be able to fold them down a little bit out of the way, opposite from each other, left to right. And turns out they were pressing up against the speaker, because now when I turn this bad boy on, I'm not sure if I can get the, there we go. There we go, max volume. That sounds much better. So yeah, I guess the capacitors did do the trick, just that it didn't sound like it at first, and like I said, I even thought it sounded a little worse because of the, get the video to adjust a little better. I thought it sounded worse because of the fact that it just sounded worse, and it turns out that those two long capacitors that I was talking about were actually pushing up against the speaker housing, and so that was causing the distortion. So yeah, full volume, much louder than it was before, and I don't have the distortion I had before.